It's no secret that the Super Nintendo and Super Famicom were home to a great selection of role-playing games. But while titles like Final Fantasy VI, Chrono Trigger and Earthbound are revered as all-time classics, there also exists a considerable catalogue of lesser-known games that often don't get their due. Some of these games shot for the moon as they attempted to go against the grain, but they perhaps ended up doubling down too much on conceptual design choices or being a bit too specific with their target demographics. Whatever the case, they all have something in common. When compared to the system's biggest hits, they didn't have their day in the sun. So for today's video, it's these games that we're going to focus on. The role-playing games that often slipped under the radar, but were still compelling in their own right. So with that, here are 7 RPGs for the Super Nintendo that we're pretty sure you haven't played. And to kick things off, we're going to start with Square's Bahamut Lagoon. Even though a good deal of Square's most popular and highly regarded Super Famicom games saw release in North America, there were a couple of games that didn't make the cut for one reason or another, and one of the more surprising of these was Bahamut Lagoon. Released on the 9th of February 1996 in Japan, Bahamut Lagoon was a late entry into the world of Super Famicom role-playing games, and it struggled to find an audience because of this. The PlayStation had already been out for just over a year, and audiences were starting to have their heads turned by the so-called next generation, which was very much now the current generation. Final Fantasy VII was even announced a week after Bahamut Lagoon launched, and that was rather prophetic, as many of the people who worked on Bahamut Lagoon also ended up working on Final Fantasy VII, including its director, Kazushige Nojima, and its main event planner, Motomo Toriyama. The plot focused on survivors of the conquered kingdom of Kana, who were attempting to liberate the world from an oppressive empire. And as a late Super Famicom game, Bahamut Lagoon benefited from everything Square had learned from Final Fantasy IV through VI and Chrono Trigger, and it showed. It featured a clever fusion of strategy and turn-based role-playing, with battles happening on a map wherein units could be moved into squadrons of 4 and given orders. But when engaging the enemy, either by attacking or defending, combat switched to a side view just like in a Final Fantasy game, and specific action commands could be issued. To assist in these battles were dragons. Though not directly controllable, dragons needed to be nurtured and fed the right items in order to become more powerful and increase loyalty to the player, and one of the more prominent was Bahamut. All things considered, it's understandable why, given when it released, Bahamut Lagoon was never localized. But if Square Enix were thinking about an unorthodox pick for their next HD 2D remake from Creative Studio 5, they really couldn't go wrong with Bahamut Lagoon. Next we have Inindo, Way of the Ninja, which came from the minds of Koei, and followed in the footsteps of many of the company's previous games like Nobunaga's Ambition and Romance of the Three Kingdoms, but differed in terms of execution. The original version of the game was released on PC-88 in July of 1991, before it was ported to the Super Famicom in Japan a year later, and then the Super Nintendo the year after that. In it, you took on the role of a young ninja, one of the lone survivors of Lord Nobunaga's massacre of the Iga ninja clan, who then sought revenge. Due to the wide reach of Nobunaga, such a task was not simple though, and it involved travelling across Japan, recruiting party members to your cause, and gaining the trust of powerful warlords, their daimyos, in order to stage an assault on Nobunaga's territory, curb his ambition, and ultimately confront him face to face and avenge the Iga clan. This wasn't too dissimilar from the approach taken in the rest of Koei's simulation games, but where Inindo differed was that it fused a ton of role-playing elements. The gameplay, for example, while it did feature some more simulation-esque elements, also featured dungeons, inns, and even turn-based combat between parties. Inindo was also fairly open-ended, and the choice of which daimyos to win over or work for was left up to the player, as well as which party members to recruit. The game also had a central focus around time, meaning that Nobunaga and the daimyos waged war around you, with the game even having a predetermined ending if you failed to beat Nobunaga before a certain in-game date. It made Inindo quite an unorthodox, unique, and also sometimes punishing experience. For fans of monster battlers like Pokemon, or those who have fond memories of series like Metabots or Robopon, the Super Nintendo had a few entries that scratched the itch, but amongst these, Robotrek stood out. Released in 1994, mere months after the release of Final Fantasy VI, Robotrek was developed by Quintet, who themselves were no strangers to the genre. They were made up of former members of Nihon Falcom such as Tomoyoshi Miyazaki and Masaya Hashimoto, both of whom were instrumental in the creation of Ys. And as Quintet, they worked with Enix to release 2 ActRaiser games, in addition to Soul Blazer and The Illusion of Gaia, in the space of just 3 years. Robotrek, known as Slapstick in Japan, was their next big game, centered on the story of a young boy who was trying to put a stop to the plans of a disruptive group known as the Hackers, who were plaguing the planet of Quintenix using a team of robots. Robotrek was a light-hearted and inventive role-playing game that really stood out from its peers in terms of gameplay mechanics. Instead of using random encounters, as was common at the time, Robotrek opted instead to have its enemies visible to the player, and battles were triggered when contact was made. In battle, players could then swap between the various robots of their team depending on the situation, one at a time, and had to not only issue commands, but also carefully consider their active robots' positioning on the battlefield. In between fights, players then needed to make use of the spoils earned from combat to invent new weapons, armor, and items, mixing and matching pieces from their inventory by using something known as the Inventor's Machine. This ability to really customize your team to specific playstyles was what made the battles of Robotrek so fun and varied, and when combined with the colourful visuals, turned Robotrek into a delightful romp with a good deal of replayability. Now, the Super Nintendo was home to a lot of role-playing games, each trying to make their mark on the genre and stand up to the heavy hitters of the time. And amongst those pretenders, Dual Orb 2 was one that definitely tried to do something different to set itself apart. Coming out on the 29th of December 1994, Dual Orb was both developed and produced by IMAX, not to be confused with the IMAX Corporation, and whose alumni featured not only Sohei Nikawa, who worked on the original Dual Orb and went on to create the Disgaea series, but also Hiroyuki Kotani, the creator of Patapon. Building upon many of the same elements of the first Dual Orb 2 was about a boy named Aelith and his quest to stop an ancient evil from a technologically advanced age that had been revived by a power-hungry empire. But instead of opting to try and improve the very Dragon Quest-inspired first-person battles from the initial Dual Orb, they decided to switch things up and create a more dynamic third-person isometric battle scene. Here, Dual Orb 2's beautiful sprite work was on full display, making for a presentation that punched well above its weight, and when paired with the game's weapon system, this helped to give the game a very unique feel. Whereas in other role-playing games, weapons were often readily available, being bought in shops, found in treasure chests, or collected as spoils from battle, in Dual Orb 2, each character only had a handful of weapons available to them for the whole game. Emphasis was therefore not on obtaining new weapons, but upgrading the ones you already had by way of the game's blacksmiths. And once upgraded enough, these weapons even gained their own special attacks, adding another layer to combat. Unfortunately, like most of IMAX's catalogue, Dual Orb 2 was never officially translated into English and remains a Japanese-only release. But it's still worth checking out for fans of old-school grind who've already played the Super Famicom's other heavy hitters. Another game that sadly didn't make it out of Japan was Tornaco's Great Adventure Mystery Dungeon. A spin-off from Dragon Quest IV, it was developed and published by Chunsoft and was released on the 19th of September 1993 as both the first Dragon Quest spin-off and the first Mystery Dungeon game. Inspired by the gameplay of Rogue, Chunsoft's Koichi Nakamura, co-creator of the Dragon Quest series, and designer Seiichiro Nagahata, had wanted to make their own version of the game's mechanics, while basing it on a franchise that would be instantly recognizable. Thus, given its popularity in Japan and their own close proximity to the IP, Dragon Quest was chosen, with Dragon Quest IV's merchant character Tornako being picked as the game's protagonist, as the idea they had in mind fit his character the best. Taking place after the events of Dragon Quest IV, Tornaco's Great Adventure saw Tornako pack up his family and shop and take up a quest to explore a rumoured mystery dungeon, a place purported to be full of treasure, making it irresistible, as Tornaco's goal was to own the best shop in the world. The gameplay had the player traversing floor after floor of randomly generated dungeon layouts and fighting hordes of enemies, all the while weighing up whether they should return to the surface with what they'd acquired or risk losing it all by continuing to probe further into the dangerous depths. To add to that, every time an action or movement was taken, the game advanced a turn, and all the enemies in the dungeon also took an action, making exploring a constant push and pull of intentional action and reacting to the movements and attacks of Tornaco's foes. Though not as epic as a Dragon Quest game, Tornaco's Great Adventure was a great, accessible roguelike on the Super Famicom that had few contemporaries, but it still featured the hallmark top-tier presentation of the parent series, even featuring art by Akira Toriyama and music by Koichi Sugiyama. We've spoken about how Dual Orb 2 switched up its gameplay style compared to its predecessor, but it was not the only game to try this approach, and in that regard there's nothing quite like Dragonview, which was developed by Kemco. Released in 1994, Dragonview, also known as Super Dragon in Japan, was a sequel to an action role-playing game named Draken, which was a groundbreaking early 16-bit hit. It featured, amongst other things, a fully open and explorable pseudo 3D first-person overworld map, in addition to PC adventure game style exploration sections and automated real-time role-playing combat. Draken, being one of the first role-playing games to make it onto the Super Nintendo in North America, had received a lot of exposure as a result, and it had performed quite well, leading to Kemco to develop a follow-up. For its part, Dragonview built upon what Draken had done, featuring the same type of overworld exploration, but taking a different approach to exploring towns and dungeons, shifting things instead to a quicker form of gameplay more comparable to an arcade side-scrolling beat-em-up. Its narrative followed the tale of Alex, a young man who was set to marry his love, Katerina, but who was haunted by an ill omen. One which ultimately was proven true when Katerina was kidnapped by a strange wizard and Alex got wrapped up in both her rescue and a plot to try and save the world. To do this, Alex needed to travel the land and do battle with all manner of fearsome monsters, using a variety of weapons and magic, fighting his way through both dungeons and the overworld, while side-scrolling battle arena sections were triggered if Alex made contact with enemy avatars. This interesting take on arcade-style combat, paired with role-playing mechanics, really made Dragonview a very interesting experience, setting it apart from even its own predecessor by a wide margin, and giving players looking for something totally out of the box an experience they could really sink their teeth into. That then brings us on to our last entry, which is another Japanese-only release called Energy Breaker. Released in 1996, late into the Super Famicom's life cycle, Energy Breaker was developed by Neverland and published by Taito. This partnership had also been responsible for the creation of the Lufia franchise, but instead of making a derivative work, Neverland decided to take Energy Breaker in a very different direction, opting to go for a more tactical role-playing angle. In this particular game, the player took on the role of Myra, a girl who had lost her memory and was spurred to adventure in her dreams by a fortune teller named Selphie, kicking off a quest to find a blue-haired man named Leon that quickly saw Myra's party grow as she travelled about the island of Zemlia and became entangled in the land's mysteries. The world of Energy Breaker was made up of isometric diorama-style maps. When exploring towns and dungeons, the player was able to move about freely, talking to other characters by using a fairly sophisticated communication system. But once enemies appeared, things switched to become more tactical. In battle, Energy Breaker played like a standard strategy role-playing game, and by spending action points, characters could do things like move, attack, or use abilities. Managing those action points was key to Energy Breaker's combat, as they could be spent to perform multiple attacks if necessary, but could also come at the cost of a character's movement for the turn. What's more, players also had to keep their eye on the battle's win conditions, as depending on the situation, these varied, and could even include strict turn limits, which kept things interesting while also rewarding bold strategies. Succeeding at combat also meant mastering Energy Breaker's skill system, which required the careful leveling of different energy types and the use of items named grimoires, a unique take on the mechanic which added depth to how the characters progressed. All of this was wrapped in a gorgeous audio-visual package, which really showed off what the Super Famicom was capable of in the hands of seasoned developers, making it even more unfortunate that the game was never released outside of Japan. And with that, they were 7 Super Nintendo RPGs you probably never played. Which of these would you be most excited to check out? And are there any other games that you thought also deserved a shout out? Let us know in the comments below, and be sure to like and subscribe to Datalog for more content in the future. Also, be sure to check out the unique content we have over on Patreon at patreon.com/Datalog, including review podcasts, general RPG news updates, and even some exclusive history episodes. Alright everyone, with that, this is Darryl signing out. As always, I'd like to give a big thank you to all of our Patreon supporters, especially Nate Dogg, who is a legendary scholar. And of course, a big thank you to everyone for watching this video. I'll see you all again soon for more RPG goodness.